Welcome everyone on behalf of Exclusive Books and Pan Macmillan. Thank you for coming. This is an incredibly important book of Mandy's. It tells the stories of so many brave people who gave so much, many of whom are here today. Thank you for coming. We really owe society, owes you a great debt. Lives have been turned upside down. But the book is making an impact, and discussions are had, and the news is full of whistleblower stories and how important this is. Just today, and thank you, Bianca Goodson, who's here, wrote an incredible letter to Andre de Ruyter at Eskom. He replied this afternoon with what I thought was a solid and good reply. So this is out in the news, and the more we talk about this and the stories and the whistleblowers, the further we can get. Not just in stories coming out, but the legislation changing as well. And thank you for coming, David O'Sullivan, a friend to many in houses and cars over the years. He's covered many fascinating stories, both as a lawyer and a journo. And David, we've come a long way since the launch on the 13th floor of the Lister building for Killing Kebble. When we were watching our back, there were some very interesting characters at that launch. Safety standards have been raised this year. Congratulations, Mandy, and thank you, David.
I love doing these. What is always fascinating about these launches as well is that Mandy organizes people who are in the books to come along. And as Terry said, that first one, Killing Kebble, we actually had the murderers there, and I got them to sign my book, Mikey Schultz and Company. And for Ministry of Crime, we had Paul O'Sullivan, amongst others, not related to me in any way, which I have to keep stressing on Twitter. And today, as Terry pointed out, we have a number of the whistleblowers here. And I thought the way we would do it is we'd tell some of the stories. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with these people, you might have lived on Mars for a little while. At the end, once you know their stories, then we'll acknowledge them. I think that's the way to do it, so you understand who we're dealing with. Mandy, let's crack straight on with this. You start the book with a very interesting quote. I'm loath to start with the first thing you do because it looks like that's the only paragraph I read. But you talk about, it's a quote from Musila Motapu, one of the whistleblowers on Trillion, who said she doesn't like this term whistleblower because she doesn't get awards or money. She gives up her livelihood, she risks her life, she's left unemployed, depressed, suffering post-traumatic stress disorder. She said, nobody recognizes or funds us. It's nonsense. We are heroes, we are not whistleblowers. And I realized to what extent this is true for almost all the whistleblowers you write about. So let's talk about the impact that whistleblowing has had on the people who have the courage to come forward. It's affected them in different ways, but those, I think, are some of the most common traits. Tell me about the people you spoke to and the characteristics you found that they had in common.
Thanks, David, and thank you so much again for doing this. And thank you all, especially the whistleblowers who are here for coming tonight. I had envisioned a great celebration of whistleblowers, and this is just weird. So thank you for being here. I have to thank Musila Motapu for being so generous in giving me that quote, because she's not actually in the book. But that quote was so, and that's because she's writing her own book, which will be available, I'm sure, soon. But that quote is so apt and so poignant and describes so well what so many whistleblowers go through. And I'm sure when you speak to the whistleblowers, they'll tell you about the great personal cost and how heavy the burden has been for them. And that's something that I don't think that anybody properly appreciated and properly understood. And as Musila has said to me so many times, that the NGOs get the funding, the journalists get the awards, they become a hashtag, and then everyone moves on and they get forgotten about. And they are left with post-traumatic stress disorder, with enormous debts, with legal fees, with the scarlet letter W. And they're pushed to the fringes of society and they're not appreciated. And that was the reason that I wanted to write this book, was because we know the stories. We know the stories of state capture, we know the stories of the arms deal, we know those headlines, but we don't know about the human narrative and what happens to the people behind the stories.
So many of the people you interview are incredibly angry, and the anger builds as they tell their stories. And let's tell some of those stories. And I'm almost going in book order, because as I was reading the book, I was taking notes. And the Rustenburg municipality is one, and it's a story, it's a cautionary tale, not even a cautionary tale, it's a tale of so many municipalities around South Africa, run by dysfunctional, corrupt people, and with a few good men and women who are prepared to come forward. But some of them lose their lives, and Mos Pakwe is one of those people. Tell us the story about the Rustenburg municipality. And it's a bizarre story, because people go on trial, they're convicted, and then freed on appeal.
So the story of Mos Pakwe was one of the first interviews that I did with his son Klolo, who left such a profound impression on me. Because the story of Mos is a story of an ANC cadre, somebody who lived and breathed as a member of the party, as an activist. He was a councillor in Rustenburg. He was meticulous in the way that he did his job. He was the kind of person who in council meetings made sure that every single T was crossed and I was dotted. And he, along with Alfred Motsi, who was a fellow councillor, picked up this, and several other councillors as well, picked up this corruption that was happening.
Oops, apologies. I had a technical malfunction at this point when the SD card decided it was too much to take in, so I had to stop filming and change the card. So I lost a few minutes, and I was a bit preoccupied by getting my Mickey Mouse camera back in action, so I wasn't paying attention until I got it running a few minutes later. So if anyone who was there happened to be recording the event on their cell phone, please send that to me. I'd be grateful. I can then splice it into the final recording, because I think it's really important that a good record of what was an excellent and uplifting evening is there on the record. But if I may just fill this gap by reading these few paragraphs from the start of the chapter, which narrates the circumstances of Mos Pakwe's murder. And just to say that what makes Mandy's book so readable is how she expertly sets up each story by painting a picture. In the chapter, Hate Me But Don't Hurt Me, she starts the book off with this rather dramatic account of how Mos Pakwe was murdered. Despite recent and specific threats to his personal safety, Mos was relaxed about his security. He had refused to get dogs or install an alarm. He wouldn't have noticed the man with the gun following him through the gate into the yard and down the driveway. 2 gunshots cracked through the silence of the hot, dry air, shattering the windscreen and hitting him in the head and shoulder. Just 2 days earlier, at an all-night briefing, Mos had handed over to senior party leaders an explosive dossier. In its more than 500 pages were documents detailing extensive corruption in the Rustenburg municipality. Now he sat dead on the driveway in his car. There was no disputing that Mos Pakwe's blood was black, green and gold. He was still wearing his black and yellow Vote ANC t-shirt. But now, as his life ebbed away, his blood ran crimson. And as I recall, David asked Mandy how this affected her personally, and she went on to speak about the parallel experience of the murder of another loyal ANC member and public representative, but this time from the Mpumalanga province, from the Mbombela municipality, Jimmy Mohlahla, who was a senior member of the ANC and had been elected as speaker for the municipality. And he had become suspicious of corruption associated with the building of the Mbombela Stadium before the 2010 Football World Cup. Now let me read 2 paragraphs from that chapter. The story of Jimmy Mohlahla and the political assassinations in Mpumalanga around corruption and the resultant whistleblowing is simply astonishing. It was a tale of sordid, state-sponsored looting, a defiant standoff between good and evil, clandestine operations involving espionage, intrigue, self-confessed hitmen, poisoning, kidnapping, and pseudonyms. It is a trail that leads all the way to the top, and a true testament to the adage that, in this country, truth is indeed stranger than fiction. In fact, several books by investigative journalists have been written about these murders and this bloody period in the country's history. Even so, Jimmy Mohlahla and others like him, who died because they chose to speak out, are largely forgotten. This story is also the perfect example of the worst case scenario of whistleblowing in South Africa, of what can and does all too often happen when those with the very best of intentions choose not to look the other way, but instead stay true to their guiding virtues and beliefs by shining a spotlight on wrongdoing. In the case of Jimmy Mohlahla, his reward was death. His murder, accompanied by excellent investigative journalism, succeeded in raising considerable awareness around the World Cup-related corruption in Mbombela. Despite this, there have been no successful prosecutions, and those who are believed to have been ultimately responsible continue to hold political office and wield enormous power and influence. Well, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to drive through Kwanyamazani Township and cross the Crocodile River on my way to the Kruger National Park without thinking again about Jimmy Mohlahla, his wife Bonnie Ndlazi, and his children Shechofatso and Chipiso, without feeling my stomach churn.
The NPA got involved in the case, and this was just a clear illustration of the state capture process that was happening, that project with the capture of the NPA, and that case fell apart. And to this day, nobody has been prosecuted or convicted for shooting Jimmy Mohlahla. And this was actually one of the last stories that I went to go and do the interview in Nelspruit. And I spoke to Bonnie, who is his widow, and also to Tsepiso, who is his son, who was wounded, who again, a lot like Floro, just has amazing perspective and maturity about the legacy. And Tsepiso speaks about the legacy of truth that his father left him, and how mature he is about what happened. His father was killed for doing the right thing, and yet he bears no bitterness and no resentment, and he completely appreciates what his father died for. Now, the corruption case that did run for a while in Mbombela fell apart because of NPA interference. So that is even more hollow, the fact that the reason that he died was because he had exposed this corruption. That corruption case fell apart.
What has happened to the information that Jimmy had?
It came out in the media and has come out in various books, but there's been no consequences in terms of anybody being held to account or anything like that. I'm
going to move on to the Estina dairy farm, and this is intriguing because here's one way we are hopeful that there are consequences for the actions, because people are being charged. We see the wheels of justice grinding very slowly, but it's a man called Dr. Kadebe, who is was a DA councillor. You describe him beautifully in the book. He's a farmer. He's a man of the earth, isn't he? And he's the person who spots this dairy farm being created in Vrede, of all places. He asks, why in Vrede? He smells a rat from the get-go. He mercifully, this is our first story where he is not killed, but it doesn't mean that people don't die. There are people who are assassinated in the story as well, Mandy. Let's go through that Estina dairy farm, because it's top of mind, it's in the news.
Yes, indeed. So here you've got a dairy farm that I think that perhaps the Guptas and the politicians in the Free State thought that perhaps that they just put it in Vrede in the Free State that no one would notice. But Dr. Kadebe was too sharp for them, and because he is a man of the earth, he knew the business. And again, this is another classic case of just a politician who is doing their job that they are paid to do, who is a councillor who realizes that there's a problem here and starts sniffing around, starts scratching around, and starts making a noise. And once he realized what was going on, he was a whistleblower. He alerted the media, he started making a noise in council meetings, and because of him, and because of the noise that he made, we started learning a lot more about Estina and the dairy farm and the cattle that were being killed there, and the fact that all this money was being spent on nothing at all. And as a result of that, Dr. Hadebe was threatened, he was intimidated, he was made a pariah, and at great personal cost, because he simply believed that it was the right thing to do.
How did he then get his information out? He then went to the media, didn't he?
He went to the media, he went to the Mail Guardian, he made sure that it got out. He also made a noise when politicians came to town to speak about it. And for that, obviously we're enormously grateful. The fact that, as the media, we need whistleblowers like this, so that when they put up a dairy farm that costs millions, it actually goes to funding a Gupta wedding at Sun City, that we know about this, and they don't just get away with it.
There is, I suppose, understandable skepticism amongst the public about the current case, the current arrests, because we've seen charges being laid, we've known about people going in court only to find the case being struck off the roll. And we expect that as a result of the hollowing out of the NPA, either incompetence or corruption within that state organ. When you look at the accused in the dock on this particular occasion, are they all the right people? And are you confident there are now finally going to be consequences for the actions?
Well, we hope so, because this is one case where hopefully there are consequences, particularly because it's been so well publicised. And that was a huge knock, the fact that the NPA had brought charges and then the case had fallen apart, that the Guptas had challenged some of the court action around that as well. So we do hope so, because I do think that the Estina project and the way that was carried out is such a great illustration of the state capture project, and the fact that they thought that they could get away with this. And they were exposed because of whistleblowers and because of good journalism.
I know it's quite, well, not that complicated, but it's a little intricate the way the money was funneled. But am I right in saying it's government money that ended up in Gupta pockets?
It's government money that ended up through the Dubai washing machine, which is incredibly complicated to explain, but ultimately it went to funding the Gupta wedding in Sun City instead of going to the intended beneficiaries. And the intended beneficiaries are farmers from Freda, people like Philemon and Gwenya and some of the other farmers that I spoke to, who had been promised that they would be the beneficiaries of this farm, that their ID numbers were taken, they were promised land to farm on, and at the end of the day they got absolutely nothing, because they were used by the politicians to get this money to ostensibly fund this project, which just never happened. And, Philemon Gwenya is one of those intended beneficiaries who was vocal. He did many interviews about it on TV. He spoke out, he was courageous in speaking out, and he was killed under very suspicious circumstances. And
an auditor, Moses Chake, also killed.
That's right. So, everyone's going to think that this book is full of people being killed, unfortunately. But these are the cases that have happened. And Moses Chake, again, he was a civil servant who was auditing what was happening and started to realize that this wasn't making sense, and there was a problem here, and he too died under very suspicious circumstances.
No, we were hoping is Dr. Khadebe here. This is Dr. Khadebe, the man who was behind Dr. We spoke about Gwenya, Philemon Gwenya, who was so vocal, one of the intended beneficiaries, who spoke out constantly, did loads of media interviews, and was killed for his outspokenness. His daughter Laliwe is also with us as well. Please let us acknowledge them. And so we come to ESCOM and Suzanne Daniels, and I found this an intriguing chapter in the book. I think of all the people, as I read the book, Suzanne Daniels was the name I knew most. There had been a lot said about Suzanne. Are you looking at her at the moment? Oh, really? Okay, I'm not going to look that way. The ESCOM company secretary and I read I managed to get a very early draft of this book, and so then I read that the notorious Salim Essa, she tells you the story that he pulls up at a petrol station, winds down the window and offers her a bribe. She says, "You can't buy me. I'm going to reveal everything." And he He says, she said, no amount of money will stop me. And he goes, well, 800 million. She laughs and drives off, but then I think kind of ponders, not that she's going to take the money, but 800 million, how's she going to wallpaper her house with 800 million rand? It is a ridiculous sum of money. And then I felt that Suzanne got pilloried to some extent in the media. Questions being asked about whether she was a true whistleblower or not. Go through the story of Suzanne Daniels.
Yeah, I think that Suzanne and I agree that I probably gave her a tough time during the interview and in the chapter, but she absolutely won me over. And I'm not saying that because she's sitting here, I've said it publicly several times before, but she really did get pilloried by Judge Zondo and faced some seriously tough questioning about her experiences. And unfortunately, this is what happens to many whistleblowers when they choose to come forward. And that some whistleblowers are to some extent not necessarily complicit, but have a proximity to wrongdoing and were witness to wrongdoing. And that's what people don't understand. They expect all whistleblowers to be virtuous and to have altruistic motives. And sometimes people don't know what they're witnessing until they connect the dots, which is what Suzanne did. As she pointed out, that Judge Zondo doesn't even know necessarily how to deal with whistleblowers when they come forward, and society doesn't know how to deal with whistleblowers in many ways.
I do want to ask you about that at the end as we wrap it up. What should we be doing? But with Suzanne, was the problem that there was a perception, because she was so close to everything, she must have been complicit? Is that the accusation?
Yes. But as she says, there were no visits to the Oberoi Hotel, there were no flights to Dubai, she wasn't in Saxonwold getting bags of cash as far as we know. She has said that did not happen. So I think that people just assume because she didn't speak out soon enough. And that's what a lot of people don't understand of whistleblowers, is at what point is the right point to speak up? And sometimes there is no one to speak up to. When the board is captured, when the executives are captured, when the minister is captured, when some of the media is captured, where do you go? Who do you talk to? Who do you trust?
And when you look at other examples of whistleblowers ending up dead, why would you want to go forward? But ultimately, some of these whistleblowers like Suzanne, they find themselves completely isolated, pariahs of society, which shouldn't be the case.
No, we wouldn't know what happened in these meetings if it wasn't for Suzanne. We wouldn't know what happened with the capture of Eskom and how the Guptas operated and Salem S's role in all of this. And that's why she is a whistleblower. We owe her a great debt. Yeah. And yet society assumes that should not be the case.
Please stand and let us Would you have wallpapered your house with 800? Tell us about that.
It was such I don't think ridiculous is the right word. It was quite bizarre. Because, this man looks at me and says, tell me what you want. And I'm like, no, nothing's going to make me change my mind. And the next minute he says 800 billion. And I look at him and I think, what, are you smoking or something? It's just like, quick second, and I burst out laughing and I just got in my car. And as I was driving, I was thinking, what does the 800 million look like? Are they going to do an EFT?
It's a Louis Vuitton bag, that.
It doesn't even fit in one Louis Vuitton bag. And then I think, okay, so how would I hide that kind of money? It's just improbable. So, those are the kinds of things, I have a rather strange sense of humor. So those are the kinds of things that went through my head. And I literally did not take it seriously until people asked me, have you been offered money? And I thought, yes, I actually have. So I had to speak out. I know Mandy asked me why didn't I say it in Parliament. In Parliament, Ajay Gupta's bare feet took precedence. So that was the sensation. But I think it's not all of us that we don't know what we're getting into, and I think all the whistleblowers sitting here, we make that decision, and you start walking around, and you actually don't know what you're gonna come across. And it's actually so bizarre. I'm listening to the stories here. I only had death threats, and they made me feel terrible. And people parading up and down my road and threatening me. And the police actually said to me, pretty much like the scenes that you described, watch out for these things. They will come and park in your driveway, or they'll jump over the wall and make it look like a robbery. So I can identify with your dad. That scene was described by the police to me to watch out for. So it's a scary experience. And thank you for recognizing us, Mandy. I know you gave me a hard time, but I didn't want to write my story myself. So thank you for writing it, and thank you for listening to me.
We think that Tsobiso Moklala, whose father, Jimmy Moklala, was the speaker at the Mbombela municipality, has arrived. Is that the case? Two other remarkable women, and Bianca Goodson and Mosilo Motepo. Now, we've spoken about Mosilo. Her quote opened our share, but Bianca Goodson as well. This is the Trillium saga. You saw this being drip-fed and coming out in various media. I found it bewildering to join all the dots. Mercifully, Mandy has done it for us. But let's talk about the Trillium saga.
Well, Bianca fed me so much wine that
she drinks 5 glasses to Mandy's 2.
Bianca's life was amazing. She had a top job at Anglo. She was living her best life. She was supporting her daughter Chloe, and she got this offer to go and work for this company called Trillium as the CEO of a subsidiary. She was only at the job for 3 months because she realized that dodginess was afoot, and they were discussing things like replacing the finance minister in the building.
This was a couple of months before that happened.
Exactly. So it was all very, very dodgy and
sorry, to the point, it's not just discussing it like let's a bit of conjecture. This is what's going to happen. They knew.
Yeah, so a lot of it didn't make sense, and she started to piece it together along with Mosilo, and ultimately she left the job. But it took her a while because her family wasn't so keen on her being a whistleblower. Her church wasn't so keen on her being a whistleblower. So she was fighting this inner turmoil of whether or not she should speak out because she wasn't supported in speaking out initially. And ultimately she decided that she just had to do the right thing, and she was compelled. And she then went to the public protector. Mosilo went to the public protector as well and landed up on the front page of the Sunday Times for it and faced criminal charges. And they cooperated with Butler's investigation into Trillium and McKinsey and what happened, and cooperated with the Zondo Commission and the NPA. And unfortunately, although she is known as the McKinsey slayer amongst her friends and family, she is unemployed and unemployable, and has sent out 2,500 applications for jobs.
You see, this is the part that I just don't understand, and I found it quite a shock in the book, because here's a woman who immediately understands that signing personal surety for a loan of 300 million rand, there's got to be something wrong, works out what is going on, blows the whistle. It all comes out in the media. She's working at that stage for Sage, sends an email to her boss and says, look, this is all going to come out, I'll resign. And I expect the person at Sage to go, I want that person to be working for me. Somebody who is so upright, got great ethics and morals. And what does he do? Accepts the resignation. And as Mandy says, to date, nobody will employ her. It boggles my mind. I don't understand that. Whistleblowers should be the most employable people.
Absolutely. And instead they are treated as pariahs and pushed to the fringes of society. And as a result of their whistleblowing, 1.6 billion rand was returned to Eskom and to the fiscus, which is an enormous amount of money. And yet they have been left with huge legal fees. They've been fortunate enough to be supported by Pluff, which is a whistleblowing organisation.
Let's expand on that, because that was very interesting. She gets assistance not from a South African organisation, a French-based
So
one.
they are French-funded, but do like to say that they are a South African organisation. But what happens is whistleblowers sign a contract, and as part of that contract they are supported, which takes away a lot of that that insecurity and not knowing where the funding will come from. Because what happens with a lot of these parastatals or companies is that they just drag it out in court, and the litigation goes on, and they bleed whistleblowers dry until they have no funding, and people are bonding their homes, and their cars are being repossessed, and these are people who are senior executives.
I thought that Bianca's story was quite a pertinent one in talking about the anguish that one goes through, because her marriage suffers as a result, and it's also just considering her daughter Chloe. If I do this, what does it mean for Chloe? And you realize we're dealing with normal, ordinary human beings, mothers in this regard, parents, and they still decide to do the right thing by blowing the whistle. And I felt that today would have been for Bianca a good day, because Andre de Ruyter, the ESCOM CEO, has invited her to, well, he's acknowledged her. Let's just spell what has happened.
Yeah, so she, on the back of the book, decided to write to Andre de Ruyter, who is the CEO of ESCOM, saying, we got all this money back for you, can you please acknowledge us? And in the US, they've got the False Claims Act, which is also known as the Lincoln Law, where whistleblowers get a percentage of the money that is recovered. So she technically would have been entitled to a percentage of that money. And she wrote to Andre de Ruyter saying, don't you want to consider giving me a percentage or employing me or just acknowledging me? And he responded. And he responded by acknowledging her, not employing her, but acknowledging her. So today was a good day for whistleblowers.
I think Andre de Ruyter, look, he's a family friend, so I'm going to say good things about him. He's a decent, honest man. I really hope he does good things for you, Bianca. And is Mosilo here as well? Her own book is coming out, and I will do the book launch for a shirt. You talked about the troublesome women, I think it was. And we've got Rosemary Hunter and Michelle Mitchley, who blew the whistle on pension funds. Let's quickly run through what they did.
I found this the most complicated story to write, just because it's about something that I do not understand, which is pensions and benefits and financial stuff. But what happened was you had Rosemary Hunter on the one side, who had her own legal practice, incredibly successful, was highly regarded in the pensions field in terms of law and litigation, who went to work at the FSCA. So she didn't have to do that. She decided it would be her contribution and she would go and work for government. And she started to realize there was a problem with these unpaid benefits, and she started digging around. And of course, when she is actually the regulator and she started asking questions, that put a lot of people out. On the other side, and it was like two women who were burrowing towards each other in a tunnel. You've got Michelle Mitchley, who is employed by Liberty, and she starts to realize on that side that there's a problem with these unpaid benefits. And I'm not going to go into all the details of the unpaid benefits, largely because I don't understand them. But you can read the chapter and hopefully that will make sense. But they both started working together and reached out to each other, and the outcome was Rosemary ended up going all the way to the Constitutional Court to try and force the FSCA to do something about this. Michelle picked up the phone and phoned the Liberty hotline, the fraud hotline, and whistle blew. And this information ended up going through to the FSCA and then back to Liberty, and they realized that somebody had blown the whistle. And as a result, she ended up losing her job at Liberty. And
shouldn't she have been promoted?
Exactly. So again, here are two very troublesome women, as they've been described by the head of the FSCA, women who wouldn't shut up because they realized that there was something going on here. And they weren't doing it for themselves. They were doing it for what Tuli Madonsela calls the Gogodlaminis. Regular people out there who could have money in these pensions, who don't know about it, and these are people to whom the smallest amounts of money make an enormous difference. And it was because they just couldn't shut up about this clear irregularity that was happening, that they landed up compromising so much for themselves, that it cost them careers, that it cost them, they both suffered enormous trauma as a result of it, because they just felt compelled that it was black or white, and this was wrong.
We do have John Clark here. Oh, he's a well-known activist as well. He's saving Wild Coast communities for years. When's your book coming out, John?
When the snapsuit ends.
The snapsuit. Mandy, you say whistleblowers must be brought into the light and celebrated, and I'm delighted in our very small way we were able to do that.
Brenda, very briefly, Brenda was also a very successful lawyer who went to London. She landed up exposing the mayor at the time, was Ken Livingstone, and landed up also being in the newspapers, being pilloried. She stood up against the mayor of London and exposed what was going on with what was the fund called? Diversity Works. One of my favourite quotes out of the whole book is from Brenda, in which she speaks about, I'd like to read it, but she swears. Lawyer who swears. In which she talks about how there's no accountability, essentially, where our politicians land up golfing and living their best lives instead of being in orange jumpsuits. So I speak to Brenda at the end of the book as well, and I thought it was important to acknowledge, although it's not a South African story, she is a South African who went to London and held power to account there.
What should we be doing to encourage whistleblowers? We have legislation, the Protected Disclosures Act. Is it enough?
No, definitely not. And I speak quite a bit about the legislation in the country and what is there. And currently we've got the Protected Disclosures Act and other laws as well. But it is very much an employment law. It's not practical in its nature. So it doesn't work for whistleblowers. So I do suggest alternatives. I look at something like the False Claims Act, which is in the US, which would allow whistleblowers to get a percentage of the money recovered, but it's not always about the money for whistleblowers. It's not necessarily about that. So what I would suggest, and what I would advocate for, is something like what they've done in the Netherlands, which is a whistleblower house, where you have a Chapter 9 organization which is funded by government but is run by civil society. And is there to protect whistleblowers every step of the way, from giving them physical security, giving them an income, helping them legally, helping them psychologically, because many whistleblowers suffer with PTSD, with the trauma that comes with it. But for me, the biggest change is, as Bianca described, we need a societal revolution in this country about how we treat whistleblowers. We need to change the perception of how we look at whistleblowers, so that they're not seen as troublemakers or impimpis, or people that are problematic. They should be appreciated and applauded and brought into the light, given national orders, celebrated and placed on a pedestal.
Absolutely right. Any questions? Anybody want to fire any questions at Mandy?
Do you think really it's going to change, or do you anticipate more material for your next book?
There will be some kind of change. Look, I haven't got grand ambitions of necessarily revolutionising the law, although I have given a copy of the book to the Justice Minister in the hope that there will be some kind of acknowledgement that there does have to be some kind of legislative change. But I'm hoping that we start a conversation at least, and this does highlight it and get people talking about it, so that people fully appreciate the role of whistleblowers. This country has so much fodder for books, and unfortunately as journalists it's hard to choose what to write about. And in many ways, with this book, I wanted to choose something that actually gave me hope. And my biggest concern is that people read this book and feel that they are dissuaded from blowing the whistle. And I want to have the opposite effect. I hope that it encourages more whistleblowers to come forward. Because if we are going to deal with corruption in this country, we need whistleblowers to come forward.
The people sitting in this room have shown the most incredible moral courage, and credit goes to them at huge cost. But I think there's an acknowledgement also, Mandy, that you have shown incredible moral courage. And it is thanks to people like you and Adnan and David and exclusive books that actually these stories do come to light. Because someone needs to write it. And you have honored the courage of so many people who sacrificed both their lives and in many ways physically, but also their careers. And I want to thank you and applaud you for that.
Question over there?
Any chance to make this into a documentary? Because I think the elite will read this and we will all be okay and we will make a fuss. But is there no sponsor that can actually physically make this into a dramatized documentary? This is South African history. This is like powerful stuff. Who's got the money?
I hope so. That would be great. Obviously some documentaries made about, Red Desire made a documentary, How to Steal a Country, which featured a lot of the whistleblowers. But I do think we need a dedicated documentary series that exposes this, because the more people that know about it, the better, obviously. And I think that would be amazing if anyone knows anyone.
Any other questions? John?
Thank you, David. I just wanted to clear up one misconception, possibly. I simply was a placeholder for the whistleblower that revealed what was happening inside Sanrail in the e-tolls thing, and he went by the name of Captain Kirk, James Tiberius, and he and the two other anonymous people are represented as that avatar. But I'm a social worker by training and profession, and have been working, as David said, as an activist, trying to expose the rot and full of any mining saga. And I found through this thing, and I want to honor Mandy for this, another niche that in my sort of anecdotage as I sort of get older, I can offer my support to whistleblowers so they don't have to go through that extraordinarily terrible ordeal that they have to go through without some sort of emotional counselling and support. So that's more or less what my niche is. And in 2 weeks' time, Mandy and I and a couple of others will be doing another sort of film webinar that we can actually document it. And hopefully I'll send it to Gavin Wood, who's a South African, who's a producer who made that wonderful film about Catherine Gunn. To say, Gavin, come home. Come home and start telling our stories, please. It's time for you to come home from exile. So anybody who knows Gavin personally, please, let's try and get him here.
Mandy, I'm just interested to get some of your views on BBS and the CFO coming forward and essentially having to go to jail as a result of that at a lower sentence. Because I don't think we would have had the progress in terms of the court cases and the number of accused and the fact that the charges are going to be expanded now, unless that CFO as an insider and a witness to what went on and probably a party, a signatory to some of those documents, came forward. And then secondly, your views on whether we're going to get anywhere on sign-off. Because I think unless we get a whistleblower on sign-off, we may never ever know what happened there.
Some time in the book drawing the distinction between a witness and a whistleblower. So, like for example, the BBS matter, Philip Truter, the CFO who has done a deal, in my mind, I wouldn't consider him a whistleblower because I think that he's done a plea bargain, he has done a deal with the state in order to testify against his accused, and we need people like that. The National Prosecuting Authority says that they absolutely need people who were complicit to testify against others if they're going to crack corruption. And I think that we're going to need either a witness like that in Steinhoff or a whistleblower as well, if anyone can unravel that spaghetti of what happened at Steinhoff, which we like to call it in South Africa. Which does raise the question of Angelo Grizzi, who was supposed to be here tonight, but now is pretty much fighting for his life in hospital. he is featured in the book, and I have faced a lot of criticism for speaking about Angelo Brizzi as a whistleblower, because he absolutely is a whistleblower. So he came out on his own acknowledgement he was involved in wrongdoing. He acknowledges that it was an act of self-preservation and that he went to the Zondo Commission, he's gone to SARS, he's gone to the NPA, he's given them information, and yet when he applied for bail, it was quite clear that the NPA has decided that he is not going to be a witness, that he's going to be an accused. And I do think that, perhaps they just thought that there were too many lies for him to be a credible witness, but it does send a pretty strong message to whistleblowers who are people who are complicit, who are thinking about coming forward, who realize that they've had this Damascus moment and that what they're doing is wrong and they want to come forward to authorities. They're going to look at a Brizzi story and say, hell, I'm not doing that, because look how the NPA is gunning for me. So if I'm sitting in Steinhoff and I was involved in whatever was going on there, I would think long and hard about coming forward as a whistleblower, because there's no guarantee that I'm going to be protected. So in all of these matters, the distinction between witness and whistleblower is fundamental, but we need people who are involved, who've got a proximity to wrongdoing, who were complicit, and they remain whistleblowers if they choose to come forward.
My name is Catherine Hunter, and I'm a sister of Rosemary Hunter and one of the chapters. But I'd like to just say a really special thank you to Mandy, because I think that whistleblowers go through absolute hell, and there's absolute craving to get the story out there, and everybody wants to write the story and to sort of clear their name, because so much smut is thrown around about them, and particularly tough women, troublesome women, and so on. So I don't think Mandy, well, maybe you do, but I would like to say be super, super aware of the contribution you've made to the individual lives of whistleblowers, because like in Rosemary's case, as you say, it's very hard to join the dots. It's very hard to see what the tracking of the money was. And if I could just have a bit of a cheek to say, because this is tough, even when you read the chapter, to understand quite what was going on there, to make 2 points. One is that the scale of the corruption in the Financial Services Board, 54 billion rand of pensioners' money is sitting inside Liberty Life. 80% of it is in Liberty Life and in other such organizations. 54 billion rand. So it's not 1 million, 2 million, 3 million. That's the one part. The second point is that Rosemary lost her court. She took it all the way to the Constitutional Court. Personal costs. So she's lost everything. She really has lost everything that she's ever earned in her professional life. She lost it on the basis that the Financial Services Board should be trusted to self-correct. They have done absolutely nothing to self-correct. The figure, when she first started coming vocal about what was going on, it was 22 billion rand of pensioners' money. Now it's 54 billion rand of pensioners' money going into exactly the same sources. They are better covered up now, but there's certainly no justice coming to the correct owners of that 54 billion rand. So anyway, I thought I'll just cut through the mess and just let you know, because it is very, very hard to know what's going on. And by the way, the same people who are at the top, Ruben Sidi in particular, is still at the top. He still wields enormous power. He still will cover up, and the whole team of people around him will continue to cover up what's going on there. And the Constitutional Court said they would self-correct. So I think it's just making that point.
You also acknowledge the Hunter family because your brother Roland, I thought, was the most remarkable person. As a conscript, he blew the whistle on the South African Defence Force and went on trial for high treason, was actually imprisoned for his whistleblowing activities. And it was only as a result of Mandy's book that I realised Rosemary and Roland were from the same family. So you do come from a remarkable family, the Hunter family. Musila Motepo would like to say something as well. This is one of our trillion whistleblowers. You want to stand up there, Musila?
I would like to address a controversial issue that has been in the headlines in the last couple of weeks about giving amnesty to certain low-hanging fruits, the juniors, the admin clerks who were complicit in corruption, the guys who were pressurized to pay without contracts. And it's remarkable that the author of this thinking is Thuli Madonsela, who was the public protector at the time when the state of capture report came out, and the Zondo Commission was because of one of her remedies. So I would just like, actually, you and maybe some of the other whistleblowers' comments to just find out what is the mood. Me personally, I want anybody who has been complicit, anybody who has stolen from the country, whether you're the chairperson or the clerk, I want to see blood on the floor. Red overalls for everybody.
I think that people have more patience, and it's very difficult to be patient. But Shimona Matoyi and Hermione Premier are working, and I maintain confidence that it's going to take a long time. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but they turn. And I am optimistic, and I'm not a fan of amnesty. People must pay.
I think it's one of your best books, Mandy. I do acknowledge a remarkable job to all the whistleblowers, the most remarkable people as well. That wraps up our book launch. I'm afraid no signings.
Bianca, you were the whistleblower who has helped us fathom what has been going on deep down and dirty in Eskom.
Yes.
You've written to the CEO asking for some recognition and acknowledgement.
And I received it last night, which was fantastic. I think I've got a win. Yes, because one of the sentences in the letter was him acknowledging my substantial contribution towards the recovering funds. So that acknowledgement means a lot. I intend to include that letter for every job application.
My interest as a social worker, having been involved in social justice issues, is how to create a culture now of whistleblowing.
I do think that we need legislative change, so I do think maybe my request, for example, to Mr. Director maybe needs to be escalated to people that are actually lawmakers. I'm thinking as far as the societal revolution, I think it's a bit different. I do think that has to start at home. So I can give you an example. I've got a young daughter. When she is playing with her cousin, she would instantly come to me and say, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy, Ethan's doing this." She's got no trepidation, or she doesn't even hesitate in blowing that whistle. But when it's the same thing with a kid at school, she hesitates because she's scared of being shunned. She's scared of her teacher telling her that she may be a tattletale. So it starts with things at home where you stop with words like tattletale, where you encourage her to always speak out. And I think I honestly believe that that's the only way to eventually change our society, is get rid of the stigma completely.